UKIP and SNP, it reminds me, of course, that it's not just young people who are flooding into the Labour Party and flooding into this campaign. It's people in Scotland in their thousands. It's people who abandoned the Labour Party to vote for other parties because they felt abandoned by the party. So there are so many that Jeremy is bringing back to us. And it's not just about Jeremy as an individual and as a personality. The reason that this campaign is setting Britain on fire is because of the policies that Jeremy's putting forward. Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, all of you, for coming along this evening. Thank you for that very warm welcome and for the kind words said by all of my colleagues on the platform here tonight. I'm in the fortunate position of being given an opportunity to articulate what I believe to be the hope, joys, demands and determination of lots of ordinary people in this country who've been ignored by policymakers, looked down on by many in our media and not recognised for the brilliance, the ideas and the enthusiasm they have for changing this country into a more decent, more democratic place in which we pass by nobody and we try and care for everybody. Surely that's a kind of reasonable basis on which we should approach politics. Our campaign was born of the election defeat on May the 7th, and we all feel very angry and very disappointed at that result. And a number of us got together and discussed what we could do about it, and frankly didn't necessarily want a leadership contest in the Labour Party. We thought what would be much better would be a serious look at the policies and the need for much greater democracy within the Labour Party. Sadly, that was not to be. Instead, we had a leadership contest, and we decided that there ought to be an alternative voice put into that contest, and we recognised that there is a gatekeeping process by which the Parliamentary Labour Party can decide who can or cannot be a candidate. And my name was put forward, and it started with a huge swing towards us when 11 colleagues nominated me, which was very nice of them, and I was very grateful for those 11. The following day, there was a huge increase in support when it went up to 12. That was because I nominated myself. And after that, it grew quite slowly. But then, two things happened. One was a number of MPs felt that they felt embarrassed, actually, about being in this position of deciding who could or couldn't be a candidate for leader of the Labour Party. And so they felt that they ought to make a nomination to ensure that debate was there. And a very large number of people, party members and others, got onto social media and said, look, there are other candidates here, but they're not offering anything fundamentally different on economic issues and a number of other issues. We want an alternative. And they encouraged, as best they could, MPs to make that nomination. And finally, it was an unbelievably successful operation with lots of time to spare when we crossed the threshold with 1 minute 50 seconds to go. So we had 20 seconds to savour it and then 1.5 minute break. So it was an easy number. And this campaign is about proposals, it is about ideas, and it is about the style with which we do things. I'm very proud of the unions that have supported us in this campaign. My own union, Unison, nominated. Unite, which Jenny represents here tonight, has given incredible support. I'm very grateful to her. The Communication Workers Union, the Bakers Union, the Socialist Education Association, the Socialist Health Association, other unions have supported, have been the Fire Brigades Union, which is not affiliated to the Labour Party, but if they decide to come back, I'd welcome them in, as I'm sure we all would. And also Prison Officers Association and the 3 rail unions, TSSA, RMT and ASLEF, and they've all given incredible help and support in this campaign. We have also managed to raise enough money to pay for our campaign and pay for a direct mail to all of the 600,000 odd people that are now registered to be able to vote in this election by appealing to people for donations, and the average donation has been £23.50. And I'm very grateful to all those people that have given us money to fund this campaign. I must tell you, we've had absolutely no corporate funding whatsoever for the campaign. I also have to say we haven't been offered any either, so we make progress as best we can in this. And there's 2 other features of our campaign. I'll go into that a little bit more a bit later on. The first one is that we are using the opportunity to put policy ideas out there. So we produced a large number of policy proposals on many things. On rights of women in society, on young people, on culture, on economy, on the Northern Powerhouse, on devolution ideas are coming up next one, and many, many more. And we put one out today on mental health and health services. All of them are ideas, all of them are proposals, all of them are open for change, for amendment and discussion. And I'm absolutely delighted at the thousands of people that are now responding and saying, well, I agree with what you suggested here, I don't agree with the other bit, have you ever thought of something else? Surely that is how we all are in life. And so, whatever the result of this election, we're not electing some know-all, be-all, see-all, do-all super personality who's going to decide all policies for the future. What we're doing is opening up a democratic process, opening up our party and our movement, opening up the opportunities of the grassroots. And I understand that some of our media have been saying very unkind things. People tell me this when I see them on the street where I live. I understand it, and I'm very sorry and very sad about it. I understand other people are saying very unkind things about some other people, and some other people are saying even more unkind things about some other people beyond that, and the other people are saying some very unkind things about the first people, and so it goes around in an ever-decreasing circle of nonsense. We don't do personal abuse. We don't expect it from others. Whatever is said, we don't reply because we're only interested in policy, policy development, democratic development, and how we together can change things in this country and change things in the world. We're simply not going to respond to any of that. Now, the issue that we're all faced with is essentially one of the economy and how we take things forward in the future. I've been in Parliament a very long time, and I have once or twice had 1 or 2 differences with the leadership of the party on a couple of issues, Iraq War and 1 or 2 other things. But I was there throughout the period of the last Labour government, and don't get me wrong, there were some great things done. Children's centres, Sure Start, National Minimum Wage, Human Rights Act, Equality Act, all great steps forward. Indeed, the targets in the NHS and the spending on the schools and new school buildings was also very good. There was some very good stuff. But, and this is the but, there were some huge problems with that. One was that we financed a great deal of the new hospital building and the new school building through private finance initiative, which has become a millstone around the necks of dozens of schools. Whilst it was not the alleged spending levels of the Labour government that brought about the financial crash of 2008-9, it was the lack of banking regulation, it was the cowboy approach of the leaders of the banks that brought about their collapse and their crash, and it was the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA. The government did the only thing it could do, which was to bring those banks into public ownership. Right, absolutely the right thing to do. Was also to put a great deal of money into the banks as essentially a very long-term loan through something called quantitative easing. That was great, and that made it a huge step forward as well. But, and this is the but that goes on after that, the government then decided, and this was before the 2010 election, that the only way of dealing with this crisis was actually to then cut back on central government expenditure, cut back on local government expenditure, on welfare expenditure, and actually create a worse situation for many of the poorest and most vulnerable within our society. They said the only way forward was austerity. We lost the election. We lost the election after our Chancellor had said he would be, if re-elected, making more cuts than even Margaret Thatcher made. This was in the 2010 election. We lost, a coalition government took over and has imposed austerity on this country, and the gap between the richest and the poorest is now bigger than it's ever been and is set to get even bigger, and they've set about an agenda which I'll come back to a bit later on, which is deeply nasty and very dangerous to our society. And so we went through into the 2015 election. There was good stuff in the manifesto, absolutely, and I agreed with most of what was in there. It was good stuff, building houses and so on. But, and this is the fundamental but, we were still offering freeze on public sector wages. We were still going to be making civil servants redundant. We were still going to be pursuing some degrees of privatisation within central government services. We were still going to be pursuing a policy of austerity. Now, austerity sounds like kind of thing you've got to do. What I'm saying is this: the austerity that's proposed is basically a political austerity, which is all about diminishing the role of the public service and the state in providing services for people and encouraging privatisation, encouraging individual provision of people's necessary support and benefit systems. And at the end of another 5 years of this, we're going to have near destruction of our National Health Service, near destruction of our welfare state, and an increase in private provision for those that can afford it in so many areas of life. What I'm saying is somewhat unusual or slightly off the wall. I would urge you to read a number of books. Stiglitz's book on how the austerity agenda came about, Krugman's work on this, and many, many others have actually explained just how dangerous and just how bad these proposals are. And so we're putting forward a different economic strategy. An economic strategy that starts from the principle that the function of government isn't just a book balancing exercise, important as though that is, but it's also about ensuring that everyone in our society has the things they basically need, and all our people have the opportunities that they deserve, because we're moving into a situation where a lot of people are working way below their capacity and their skill level. A lot of young graduates are leaving university with massive debts, inability to get work or inability to get work anywhere near their abilities, and instead we are pursuing a free market economy with a complete imbalance of financial services over everything else. And so we're suggesting a number of things. One is raising the national minimum wage to the TUC figure of £10 an hour as a good start. What we're also suggesting, instead of the race to the bottom of cutting corporation tax, of raising corporation tax slightly so that we can, instead of penalising people for going to university and getting a qualification and getting a degree from which we all benefit from a well-educated society, instead we pay for those fees so students don't leave. Invest in setting up a national investment bank which would be funded in part by the money that's already been put into the banks, and that National Investment Bank would be there to pay for the necessary infrastructure improvements in this country, rail infrastructure in particular, but also broadband infrastructure, would also be there to invest in housing for the needs of everybody, and I'll come back to housing in a minute, but would also be involved very heavily in the promotion of high quality, high-tech engineering work and engineering enterprises in this country, because this area, like many others, has been the source of so many great inventions. The hovercraft and many other things were invented in this area. But we've been very bad at taking inventions through to production and very bad at developing that productive capacity. I realise none of this is simple or none of it is easy, but if you have a government that is serious about promoting and supporting the skill levels of society, then you can begin to get somewhere. I've been told that this is wildly swivel-eyed, radical, far-left, ultra-left stuff. I met somebody from Germany who said, well, we've been doing that for years. It's all absolutely wrong. Those are some of the proposals that you'll find there in the economic statements we put forward. But what's the government's response in all this? Having taken the banks into public ownership, which is the right thing to do, the shares were then put in a holding company, which the Chancellor of the Exchequer controls, and George Osborne is now selling off those shares in RBS at a loss, and he's selling off this year £30 billion worth of state assets. I'm very unsure of what the valuation level of those things are. And so what we're saying is, Mr. Osborne, be very careful. First of all, it's not yours to sell, it is publicly owned. If we win an election and assume office after the next election, just as in 1997 windfall taxes were imposed on those people that had made grotesque profits under the previous government, we will look very carefully at the value at which all those things were sold and demand that the public get their assets back, or the value of those assets back. We cannot allow the government to go on with that particular process. And so at the heart of what we're saying is that we have to have an economy that is growing and an economy that is creating jobs, so that there is a high level of employment, but there is a high level of very skilled employment within our society. But the other side of the equation is quite simply this. I kind of assume that everybody here fully supports the National Health Service and the principle of healthcare free at the point of use. And indeed, there was something deeply memorable to me about doing a rally in Tredegar, the town where Naren Bevan was the MP, and used to report back to his constituents on the moor above the town on his work and his development of the National Health Service. And he said many things about the NHS, but one of them is, how could you call a society civilised if it denied healthcare to somebody that needed it because they couldn't afford it? And he then went on to say, I want to live in a civilised society. We do have an NHS free at the point of use. It is in grave danger. It's in grave danger by an internal market in which a series of profit-related companies compete for services. It's in danger because there's insufficient planning for the needs of healthcare across the country. Instead, there's all this competition between hospitals and sometimes between privately run hospitals of what they're going to do, and there's the costs of the private finance initiative that goes with it. There's also, I believe, insufficient attention paid to the grotesque levels of health inequality in Britain. All over Britain, you could take a bus ride across any city, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Birmingham, London, Southampton, any city. You take a bus ride across the city and you could measure within a few miles levels of life expectancy. You could take a bus in North London from Muswell Hill to Tottenham, which is what, 3-4 miles at the most, the life expectancy drops by 10 years during that journey. Take the ride across Glasgow, it's even more. Those are grotesque levels of health inequality. And so we have to have an NHS that is focused, absolutely focused, on helping everybody, supporting everybody when they need healthcare, but also focused on reducing those health inequalities, and if necessary, spending much more in the poorest inner urban areas to improve the life chances and the life expectancy of all of those people. Have a much better approach towards mental health and mental health services and the amount of resources we put to it. We have a society that is still using disgusting, horrible, stigmatising language towards people that are going through a mental health crisis. We could, all of us, go through a mental health crisis. All of us can go through deep levels of stress, and stress comes from many things, from family breakup, from poverty, from bad housing, from losing a job, to deep debt, to alcoholism, to drug-related issues. It can come to all kinds of things. Who are we to pass by on the other side and just make snide remarks about those people? Cannot we have a much more civilised approach to mental health and mental health needs within our society? We put forward a discussion document on that today, and I urge you all to have a look at it. If you've got ideas, please send them in to us, because that is what it's all about. And I hope, depending on the result on September the 12th, that will be the approach the Labour Party adopts in the future, of a much more open, consultative way in which we develop policies and develop ideas. There's lots of intelligence and brilliance out there that we need to bring forward. But then there's another side to the, if you like, the 1940s settlement in our society. That 1940s post-war settlement was a belief that society as a whole mattered and everybody mattered. And just, I say by an aside to those who are concerned about the levels of debt and expenditure, that the 1945 government inherited a debt to GDP ratio of 250%, but felt the best way out of it was investment and growth. We have a much lower debt to GDP ratio at the present time, and we're told we can't afford to invest. Well, sorry, we can, we should, and we must. Of our attitudes as a society. We have, supposed to have, a universal welfare state that provides genuine social security for everybody, to stop anyone falling into destitution, prevent anyone falling into destitution. There are big holes in that welfare state. Jenny's waving a piece of paper. I wasn't sure if it was a time notice or just waving a piece of paper. It's fine, it's okay. Those big holes in that welfare state means that there are people in every city that sleep on the streets. There are people who've gone through benefit sanctions and their children suffer as a result of it. And there are people that are utterly desperate and destitute. I travel around the country a lot. I talk to a lot of people who are often in a desperate situation. They're like you and me. They've been through a bad time. They've been through a crisis. Sometimes they're ex-service people. Sometimes they're people with family breakup, all kinds of things. And they end up somewhere along the line, desperate, sleeping on the streets and begging. And then you go to any city, midwinter afternoon, January, February, and you see that queue outside a night shelter looking for somewhere to go for the night. And then you begin to realise that our welfare state doesn't actually work to prevent everyone falling into destitution, and we're anaesthetised against their suffering by the way in which some, but not all, of our media routinely put out these awful stories about Benefit Street, Benefit Street. This kind of language in our society and look to a more democratic, more coherent, more humane, more inclusive way of looking at things. But that also then leads on to how we do all this, because we have, this government particularly, has cut many benefits, continues to cut many more. Disabled people have suffered the most. The availability for work tests have become utterly brutal, to the extent that some people who've been passed as available for work when they clearly are not, then don't get a job, lose their benefits, and some have even committed suicide as a result of it. We need to alter our behaviour. So in part, it's the language all of us use, both in public as political representatives, but it's the language we use at all times, and challenge that inhumanity that is there so often in the language that we use. Issues of housing within our society. You mentioned the situation of housing in Southampton and other areas, and it is a very serious crisis that is all over the country. It's a crisis of the cost of owner occupation, which is completely impossible for most young people to get anywhere near it. It is a crisis of the lack of supply of council housing. It's a crisis of the sale, enforced sale, of housing association properties, and it's a crisis of the largely unregulated private rented sector and the sky-high rents that they're able to get away with in central areas of all our cities. So what we're having, because of this lack of any serious government policy on housing, is actually a process of social cleansing from the central areas of many of our cities. It's not just London that's suffering from this, it's all over the country where of benefit cap and high rents means that those people who are eligible for housing support don't get enough housing support to pay the rent because of the benefit cap. I'm not in favour of a benefit system that jointly subsidises low wages and high rents, but I am in favour of a benefit system that ensures no one is destitute and every child has a reasonable roof over their head. I'm also strongly in favour of investing in council housing as being the best and most secure way of getting those things are very, very important, because if we invest in improving our society, what I've talked about through the National Investment Bank, in infrastructure, rail infrastructure, and all the other infrastructures that go with it, investing in manufacturing industry, investing in housing, you both create jobs, you both develop the industry, and you deal with the issue of children growing up in overcrowded accommodation and the quality of the private rented sector, which is also a part of the issue. And then you look at the longer term consequences of bad housing. You look at overcrowding, you look at children underachieving in school, you look at family breakups, and you begin to see that it is part and parcel of a huge social problem in Britain today. Can't we show real determination? Instead of the endless sophistry about market solutions to everything, say, actually, it is the function of government to ensure that local authorities are sufficiently well funded or given the opportunity for borrowing in order to build the stop this endless punishment of any local authority that tries to defend its services or do anything that's good for the entirety of the community. Because if this government carries on with the strategy they've got, local authority services all over Britain are going to be decimated as a result of it. And so we do need a united campaign demanding from government proper funding for local authorities now, not just in 2000. The last couple of points I want to make are these. Education is something that we all value and we all appreciate the value of it. Unfortunately, I'm not sure our government understands or appreciates the value of education. Well, they appreciate the value, but it's only a monetary value in their case. They understand the price of everything and the value of nothing. I believe that we have to look very hard at our whole education system. We have preschool facilities that are inadequate in supply, inadequate in that only the children of the very poorest and those parents who can afford it tend to get there. Others don't get there at all. We have primary and secondary schools that are either being turned into academies, or the only new schools around are the free schools that are on offer. I don't see anything wrong, and in fact I see lots of merit in strengthening the role of the local education authority, in promoting that family of local schools, colleges and learning, and all the adults that can get from that, rather than this promotion of free market competition between those schools. We're also suggesting, and it's an idea we put there, of a national education service that would help to fund colleges, but also help to fund vocational education and ensure that apprenticeships and vocational is something that gives people a real chance of opportunity. But our campaign is about all of those things, and it's also about Britain's place in the world, how we don't end up going to war in Iraq and so on alongside the USA in the future. Instead, we become much more of a force in the world for human rights and for justice and for environmental protection, and we use the skills and the energies that we've got for a more productive way of doing things. Because wars have a habit of coming back to bite you. It's easy to go to war, as it was in Iraq. It's very hard to deal with the consequences of it, and those consequences are still there all over the Middle East and all over the Mediterranean, of those that have died, of those that are refugees, those desperate people trying to survive crossing the Mediterranean, and some of those equally desperate people that have got to the shores of Europe and now wondering what on earth life holds for them. None of this is simple, none of it is easy, and all the rich countries in the world have got to get together to support the refugee crisis that is global at the present time. There are more displaced people on this planet than at any time in history. And so a Prime Minister that uses the language of description of insects and swarms to describe people that are very desperate, surely we can do something a bit better and a bit more humane than that. Is at one level a campaign for a position in the Labour Party. There's also the election of the Deputy Leader. But it's also about providing this openness and this opportunity. I was making a list earlier of all the towns and cities that we've been to already as part of this campaign, and I got to 40 already, and there's plenty more to go. And everywhere we've been, there's been huge meetings and an enormous amount of enthusiasm. Of young people, older people, people coming back to Labour, people questioning the direction in which this country is going, questioning the direction in which the Tory government is taking us. Last Sunday's Observer had a very good double-page spread, which if I can open a newspaper with one hand as a conjurer does behind a mask, and hold it up to you, you'll be able to see it. How about that for dexterity? You see it there, right? Okay, thank you. You're supposed to applaud that one. Shows the way in which this government is systematically attacking our human rights, attacking our civil rights, attacking our trade unions, attacking the whole concept of the kind of society we want to live in. And what's great about this summer and the campaigning that's gone with it is the optimism, the enthusiasm, the size of the meetings and the encouragement people have got. I want our Labour Party to be a social force in the community at all times. I want everybody to be welcomed into the party, to take part not just in elections, important as they are, but in all the campaigns between elections, so that we can oppose this welfare reform bill. What an abuse of language that is. We can oppose the trade union reform bill, another abuse of language that goes with it, and put forward something very different and something very good within our society, so that we do build a coherent society. We do protect and defend our environment. We do give space to people to give their opinions, give their views, and give that democratic voice, something that the whole Labour movement was founded to achieve. Those brave people that formed trade unions in the 19th century, those brave people that established the Labour Party more than 100 years ago, those brave people gave us national insurance, gave us the NHS, Human Rights Act, Equalities Act, gave us so much, gave us equal pay, gave us rights for women, gave us votes for women, gave us so much. We are not, absolutely not, some backward-looking throwback campaign. We are saying that in the 21st century, there is an excitement in this country, there's an excitement in Europe, there's an excitement in the USA, where people don't want a world controlled and run by global corporations. Instead, they want real democracy where they can control their own lives. Real democracy where they can... That is what is so exciting about all of this. And whatever happens on September the 12th, we've taken the cork out of the bottle, and it's fizzing well. It's fizzing beautifully. And all these ideas and this inspiration and this sense of unity that comes together. No more the blame culture against minorities. No more the blame culture against the vulnerable. Together we are very strong. Together we can achieve a great deal. So let's stay together to make sure that we are that democratic pressure in our society that can challenge injustice, challenge inequality, challenge the brutal free market economics, which is all the Tories know and understand, and say to everybody out there, one day you might be old, one day you might need an ambulance, one day you might need an NHS, one day you're going to need the support of everybody else. We all care for our neighbours. Can't we approach our politics on the basis we all care for each other? Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, friends and comrades, we've now got about 20 minutes for questions. I'm going to take them in groups of 3. Please do keep your interventions brief and don't make your own speeches. What we want from you is questions on the ideas